We are
Here we are.
here we are again.
It's we've had these little mic issues. It's funnily enough, our guest is Mike.
Yeah.
Oh wow. So today is a cool show. We're going to have Mike Sellers on, and we are going to be talking with him about virtual worlds on
A Wonderful Chaos.
Hey.
Behind the scenes of A Wonderful Chaos, if only people could watch.
Yeah, they could only watch the chaos behind a wonderful
Andy,
chaos.
hit the box, hit the box. Just tap it.
We're not getting the technology to work for us, which is good. It's bringing us back to our roots. Remember,
Yeah.
we've always said that if we ever got frustrated with things not working, we would not be living true to the actual values of this show.
Exactly.
So this is another show. So I was really excited about this show for many reasons. I have a friend, Gino Yu, and Gino is he sets me up on blind dates. He's just a friend, and he'll say, just go and meet these people. And, and half the people, you're kind of like, okay, I got to go through all of them in order to find these gems. Because some of them you just connect with and you get a great vibe. And others you're like, oh, it was just nice to chat for a bit and then move on. But with Mike, it was just sort of sitting with a kindred soul. I was at Indiana University. I went into his office and we chatted. And I just saw everyone who has sort of a certain way of looking at the world, they just apply their sort of disposition in different ways. So we're very similar in how I feel we see the world. And yet where I'm sort of put my effort and time is in relations and how people connect to one another. Where he's put his time is how to create a virtual world where people can interact, where they feel engaged, and where they sort of can, I would say beyond be entertained, allow that world to in some way influence them and them to influence that world. And there's so many thoughts that come into my head when I think of creating virtual worlds, because on one level, we can go really far with this one, because if you think of consciousness, then to some degree, you could see that the world we're living in is a projection, and it is, in a way, virtual. It's our virtual projection of a world.
Yeah.
And what I love is that to do what Mike does, he has to figure out where is the commonality in all of humanity. What's the incentives? What's the behavioral patterns? And how do we manipulate the hell out of people in order to get them to behave in certain ways?
I'm not sure how he took that one.
I don't know. We'll talk to him when he comes on. But I mean, if something is true, it's that if anything's going to work, we're going to have to understand how the human mind works. Because if we don't understand that, then everything is arbitrary. So we need a reference, and then we build in our systems or our patterns in order to initiate or create certain behaviors. And he's been doing this. In fact, not only is he doing it, he's writing the big, massive books, the ones that are textbooks that you have to read in college, so that people basically learn what's the method and what's the approach to doing that. I printed out, Vamos sees, I think it's in 50 shows, I've only printed out one other resume, as it were.
49 shows.
49 shows, almost 50. So this is the resume of Mike here. He's won a lot of awards. He's written a lot of books. I don't want to necessarily go into those details because we can discuss it.
He's important.
He's important. He's important. He certainly isn't going to say that when he's on. But so, and that's it. So we may look at the games, understand the theory, or we may get into consciousness a bit. I don't really know where we'll go, but I think
it sounds to a certain degree that you have to really know yourself. Oh yeah, one mic,
one love.
One love. But before we jump to Mike, Andy, how are you? I hear your voice is a little bit.
I recorded 9 of the most painful chapters of the new book.
So you've been crying the whole day.
I wasn't crying. I was slurring words. So as you're reading and you have your headphones on, you hear when you don't pronounce a word correctly. So I'm speaking and then I'll slur a word. I'm like, oh, damn it, I got to do the whole chapter over again. And then you screw up sometimes so many times. You're like, it's going to take me so much time to edit this. So you go back to the beginning and you read the whole thing again.
Wow.
So I had for the audiobook, I wasn't on my game today, but I promised myself I got 9 chapters instead of the 10. So I've read 29 of the 44 chapters so far.
Can't wait.
And you? How was your day?
Productive, creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I had a call with Andy today, and that call really helped me to get perspective. Thank you.
Oh, sweet. Cool. Nice. Well, I think if you're okay now, I'd love to bring Mike on.
I'm feeling very okay.
Nice.
Hey, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, guys.
Have you ever been announced like that before?
Never. Thank you very much. No, never.
Could you relate with how I introduced it, or was I going too far off?
I mean, there was nothing that you said that wasn't true, but I'm like, at the same time, like, I've never been introduced like this before. That's something else. So it was great just hearing you guys talk too.
Yeah.
I think getting perspective on just how everyone is doing is important these days. More these days than ever, maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I could hear it in his voice that maybe it sounded like his voice was very low tone, like it didn't have that energy, that fire.
Yeah.
And I'm also bouncing my feet. He knows when I'm like not in my skin, when my legs are bouncing. So I can see him looking at my legs going, okay, there's something going on.
I love how we judge our own achievements too. You said, 9 chapters out of 10. Dude, 9 chapters? I mean, that you read? So, don't be too hard.
Yeah, they're short chapters though. Let's get this clear.
They're short, but like every chapter there's emotion there, right? So I can't wait to listen to the audiobook. Because when he's reading it, you could probably feel the emotion in the moment.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, I enjoyed that part. When you read back an experience you had, and it's about a dialogue, then you're reading it, and the funny thing is you're reliving it, and then you're forgetting you have to read again because you're kind of in the moment that you were in, and you don't think I now need to pronounce things.
Yeah. Right. Wow, that's a challenge.
I would love to transition to you now.
Okay. All right.
So tell me, like, what was the moment, if there was one, when you said, oh, this is something I really want to do, like whatever the rest of my life is, or at least I want to get very deep into? Like, when did that happen for you?
I mean, there have been multiple moments along the way, and this is kind of my 4th career, what I'm doing now. I mean, for me, it all makes sense. I can see the through line there, but my wife once commented that I didn't have a career path. I'd sort of a career swamp. But it's worked out okay. But I've had multiple moments where I have been doing something, playing a game or interacting with other people, going, oh, there's something special here. There's something really interesting here. And in the mid to late 1980s, I'm trying to think when it was exactly, playing an online text game, Text Mud, multi-user dungeon, multi-user dimension, some of the earliest multiplayer games. And realizing, oh, this is really different. I mean, I had been playing role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, things like that since I was in college. But this felt really different to me. And then in the early 1990s, I was actually working as a user interface designer, so working on interactivity and things like that. And I had a boss who kept saying to me, "Why can't we make our products look more like these games?" And so I would try and say, "Oh, we can't do that." I'm like, so it was a little frustrating, but it really led me into, I think there's something kind of essential here. And for me, this was working in games and working eventually in virtual worlds, was bringing together a lot of different threads. I grew up as the son of a psychologist, and so had sort of all that in my background, and learned some computer programming, and was able to sort of bring all these things together to say, I think there's something different that we haven't seen here. And that for me is one of the constants I look for in my life, is what's the new thing? What's the new and different thing that I can maybe contribute to?
Would you say that, in my introduction, I mentioned that, and you brought in the word psychology. Would you say that in essence, you're really seeing human patterns and then utilizing that awareness and kind of embedding that into game design? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, very much so. In fact, you can't really do game design without some knowledge of human psychology. And there's kind of a light side, dark side thing here. I mean, one of my long-term like life goals that I have hit a little bit a couple of times, enough to know, okay, there's something there again, but is to help people understand and experience what it is to be part of a community and really have that feeling, which I think too many of us don't really have as much as we'd like. And this gets us more directly into virtual worlds, to do so in a way that takes us out of our day-to-day setting, both because we can talk about the magic circle, the way where we play games. It's a separate space, but so it's a less risky space, but also we can strip away all the stuff about, well, I live in this country, in this part of the country with these people. There's all these relationships that we have, physical and social, that can entangle us. And so if you can say, hold on, here's a new thing, a new place you can be, where you can just explore what it is to be there, I think that's really helpful and edifying. Now, that said, I've worked on a lot of different games, a lot of different kinds of games. I have one time worked on a what's called a social casino game. It was a virtual slot machine game where you don't actually get any money. You can't get any money out of it. That's what makes it social, they said. And that was as far as my orbit went out into sort of exploring the dark side of human motivation, how you can really tweak these things. And there's a lot you can do, and a lot people are doing in games and in politics and everything else to really tweak and undermine our own goals and motivations in ways we don't often realize. So I think it's something that's a force that can be used for good or not so good. I'm hoping to do that more for good.
And I'm curious on the community, because we've done shows on community here, and the thing that I'm always curious, because when you get digital, it's like now I'm no longer in contact with the other. So when you say community, how would you see community, say, compared to like a Facebook? Like, what is the difference between your idea of what community is, or is it similar or not similar to Facebook?
Well, I mean, there's the hour, Andy. We can talk about that for a while.
There's a course, the class.
So when I first, my first virtual world game was launched in 1996, and I spent the next few years after that seeing what we had done, trying to figure these things out. Like, what is community, and what is it? How is a community online versus different from one that's offline? And now, how does sort of a heavy, high commitment community like in a game world differ from being on Facebook or Twitter or something like that? And one of the first things that astonished me was there is no accepted definition for here's what a community is. In sociology, anthropology, I mean, I came from more the natural sciences world where we know what a cell is. We know what animals are made of cells. Okay, we got that down. That doesn't really exist for community. And so I really went on kind of a deep dive to try and figure that out. And as far as the virtual worlds go, what fascinates me is that in physical communities, we are always tied first by physical resources. So I believe it's the case that Indianapolis is the largest city in the United States not built on a natural waterway.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's actually built for political reasons. It's in the dead center of the state. So they could avoid all sort of north, south, east, west divisions. They said, nope, it's going right there. But what that tells you is that we build things based on natural resources, water in particular, but water, access to trade, things like that. Well, in the virtual world, you don't have any of that. Again, you can sort of wipe the slate clean. Yeah. And then to your question about Facebook and other things, we've seen this blooming of online community in the last 10, 15 years that for those of us who've been doing this since the 1990s is really amazing. It feels like I'm part of the Cambrian explosion where you have all these new forms of life evolving. But we still see a lot of constants and we see some differences too. So in a community like Facebook, you may have some places, some communities that are very strong and others that are very ephemeral. I went to high school overseas. I went to high school in the Philippines. And so after high school, we all went our ways around the globe and didn't see each other again. Well, thanks to the miracle of Facebook, we are all, many of us, now back together again. And these people feel like my family because we went through so much together in such a strange time and place. So that, I think, is a valid community. People help each other out. We all interact together. And yet people drift in and out, But then you have something like a Facebook community based around a new movie, for example. Some people are going to really really center their life around that movie. They're going to be super fans of that. Yeah, others are, I'll dabble in that for a little bit, and they kind of drift away. And then that gets to the central thing I think about community, which is this sense of shared identity. And that for me is the definition, or at the core of the definition of community, where you have a group of people who share an identity to the point that they will say, yes, I am a blank.
Nice.
And to the degree that people do that, you have an ongoing structure at kind of a higher level. And now we're getting 5 minutes in, we're getting to very deep water.
Well, you say this is deep water, but this is the water we swim in daily here.
Good. Okay.
So all we're talking about, and what you're kind of reaffirming, is that we are always saying that if one identifies with something, right, there's attachment to that. So it's very basic. What I'm hearing is, Andy, that once one identifies themselves as a thing, that attachment basically, in essence, reaffirms whatever it is they're looking from that group, and they need it. I would even say you create a need instead of just a thing, as it were.
Well, and we all have a very deep need. I mean, I can go down to the neurology on this. When we feel affirmed in our place socially, I'm in my right place. I am sitting where I'm supposed to sit. I'm with the people I'm supposed to be with. I get get serotonin rewards in my brain.
Yeah.
And then all the way up to social, I'm wearing the right kind of clothes. I'm again in the right kind of place. I live in the right kind of house, or whatever it is. Where right kind is really defined ephemerally, but defined by the group itself. And this is where we get into some really interesting, to me, fascinating things. Where yes, there is an attachment to the group, and I contribute to the group, and my voice contributes to the group, but the group also contributes to me and helps make me who I am.
Yeah.
So if I say I am in this political party, or I'm in this country, or I'm of this gender, all of these things help us affirm who we are, and then we also open ourselves up to so this is who I'm going to be in the future. Mm-hmm. And then we get into wonderful things. So you can say, I'm going to do this hard thing because I'm on this team. I am going to, I am a big fan of this sports team, so I'm going to do this hard thing, and go to see them play or something like that. But it can also create a lot of dissonance, where you can say, all my life I've called myself this, and now suddenly I feel like the group has left me, or I've left the group, and that creates a tremendous amount of tension in us.
Yeah.
These are things
this would go through to because we're spending a lot of time. We were on a call with another IU professor, Frank Diaz, who does mindfulness and music. Mm-hmm. And basically he's a Buddhist Soto tradition teacher. And our talk was very much tied to attachment. So what I'm hearing is, and this is a funny paradox that I enjoy a lot, is that we attach to find meaning. And yet, in order for us to do self-realization, we have to come to grips with the expectations that we've unconsciously projected onto the group. And what you're saying is that we're resentful when we actually don't get whatever we thought the group was supposed to give us, right?
And I think, yes. And I think that's actually important for personal growth. I mean, just to go into the attachment side of this for a minute, I'm a big fan of the attachment, being attached, unattached, detached. I think we are often unhealthily attached to things, and that at a certain point, I think it's healthy for us at a certain point in our lives, but at some point you say, I am myself. I will stand by myself, and yes, I will still identify with these groups and be part of this community, but I'm going to unattach myself just a little bit so that my expectations of myself don't have to be perfectly reflected in the group, or vice versa. So I can say, I love my wife very much, but we are not the same person. And she has her own interests, her own strengths, her own weaknesses. And that's okay, because my sense of identity is not attached to who she is. Same thing with a political party or religion or anything like that. And so I think this is something that it's a stressful time that people need to go through, or most of us inevitably go through, to say, hang on, I no longer feel like that I match up 100% with this group. So I can no longer be attached, or if I try and stay attached, it becomes increasingly stressful. And that happens certainly in communities as well as in relationships or anything else.
Yeah.
In fact, I would go so far as to say that, and I'll come back to this one maybe a little bit later, but we are all communities of one. And if we're in a long-term relationship, we're in communities of 2, families are slightly larger communities, all the way up to the planet as a community. And that there's real, there are things I mean very specifically about that, where I don't mean to sound too airy about this. It's these are all very real things.
No, we're totally. You're not airy. Like you're
Okay,
saying like what seems like it's just obvious in one level, right? If I look inside of my brain, there's at least 4 of us in there at any given moment arguing with each other. So,
well, let me. So, community is one of my big things that I focus on, but it's also an instance of something I think is even deeper, and that's the study of systems in general. And this is what I've written about, and I teach a lot about. So one of the things I tell my students is a quote that I found that I love, that a table is more like a thing is more like a tornado than a table. So we look at a table, we say, well, that's a solid thing, and a tornado is this whirling thing. Well, everything, all of us, are these whirling tornadoes. The other thing that I will tell them is that the way you know when you have a stable system is when it persists over time. So if Indiana University has been there for a lot longer than anybody who's currently there has been there, and will be there long after we're gone. It is its own thing, very much as I am, or my table is, or my marriage is. So there is something that emerges, and this is where you get into the wonderful area of emergence, from a conversation like this one. This conversation isn't in me or in either of you. It's above us and around us. Yeah. And that's a new order of things. So as you can tell, I can go on about this for some time, but community is the way that we experience being part of a new thing at a meta-human level, if you will.
There's so many thoughts going in my head. I'd like to leave space for Bambos because he tends to break the rhythm, and I think maybe it's always nice to test you. No, test me, I would rather say, than you.
As you're talking, I can't help but listen. That I'm really active in my head because I'm taking in the information.
Right.
So in general, when Andy wants me to intervene, he wants me to bring us into the body a little bit. I am curious, like as you experience the world around you, how do you experience it in your body? Like if you're knowing all these behaviors, like are you also really in touch with this part?
I think it's healthiest to do so, certainly. I think it's really easy for people like me, at least, I don't know about anybody else, to get lost in my own head. Sometimes to get lost on my screen. If I'm working very hard on a problem, the world goes away. And the thing is, I know about the psychological processes involved in that as well, the sort of narrowing of attention. But I mean, at what may seem to be a almost trivial level, I really don't think is. This is one of the reasons why I try and at minimum go out and take a walk with my wife every day, or nearly every day. Just getting out and I mean, even the simple act of focusing on something more than 5 feet away from you is important. And I think that you can look at that literally and metaphorically in a lot of ways. Getting out of my own shell, my own mind, my own head, to see the world around me, to see people who aren't like me. Again, a little bit more than the 5 foot vision. I think is really important. But in terms of the physicality, I think that is vitally important. And to bring us back to virtual worlds, it's the one thing that we lack in virtual worlds. We don't have that physicality, and it is a little bit like saying, let's make a world, but we won't have the color red in it anywhere.
But I want to ask you about that, because even that feels, with the whole VR world, that changes. I even saw a really an incredible special or episode on sexual devices that are so simulated that it's almost like, oh wow, this is scary. We're getting into the world where all the digital is now synced up with the devices themselves. So,
and we are breaking down that wall. And one of the things that our minds do really well is make sense of the world around them the world that our eyes and our brains perceive, which means that we can, if you want to call it this, we can fool ourselves easily. I feel like I am talking to you as if we're in the same room, but clearly we're not. If I am looking at something in VR, I'm completely fooled because my visual sensorium is just entirely taken up, and at some level, my mind believes those things in front of me are physical things. The same with augmented reality. And augmented reality in some ways is even more powerful because it's overlaid on the world. When you see, if you're playing Pokemon Go and you see a Pikachu out in the world, at some level, your brain is entirely believing, yes, that Pikachu is really there. There's another part of your brain that is saying, no, I understand it's just a simulation. When we get this into things like kissing or hand-holding or sexual activity, we can simulate those things, but there is still this layer of difference. So there was an interface for people to kiss at long distance. And I know there have been hand-holding interfaces, and I'm sure there have been, again, any sort of sexual activity you can think of, there has been some sort of way to simulate that at a distance. But there's still this part of us that knows this isn't really happening. And that is something we don't seem to be able to shed, or at least not for very long. We come back to ourselves. I think this is... Einstein had a quote about relativity of time, your hand on a hot stove versus sitting on a park bench by a pretty girl or something. I think there's some part of this where, at least for heterosexual guys, if I'm sitting on a bench with a girl, I may be, oh hey, this is this pretty girl, and I'm an old married guy, but there's some part of my head that knows that this is not going anywhere. She is not a potential partner for me. She's just a lovely young woman in her own right, and so I'm not going to get over that, or I'm not gonna lose that. And I think the same is true even deeper neurologically when we talk about interacting in virtual worlds or in VR. You can have emotionally and cognitively and socially really deep and very real interactions. People absolutely fall in love in virtual worlds or over VR, but the physical dimension is still missing. And it's something that is I've chased my tail on that one for a long time. Yeah. How much this is pheromones? How much this is just the fact that we live in 3D space? I don't know, but it's a fascinating area.
Do you think as earlier or as later generations are raised more and more with the interfaces that they'll have a different experience of the world just because of that reality that they have?
I don't think so anymore. I used to, and I think now we've seen kids come up, kids who can't walk yet playing with an iPad. And it's amazing to see some kid playing with a tablet who clearly isn't literate or anything like that, but they get tap and swipe. We get those things instantly, again, because they react to this in our own physicality. But what we haven't seen is that loss of distinction between the virtual world and the physical world.
Wow. Yeah. Like when you're on your journey of creating these games, right? Did you ever get to a point where you were uncomfortable about what you were doing? Like your mind was saying right, wrong, and you felt it also in your body as a contraction or as an expansion?
I mean, there are definitely moral choices you make, and moral choices that I'm making as a designer, and choices that I make where I have to say, am I making a moral choice for someone else?
Oh, yeah.
One that the games industry has struggled with, and I think is mostly past now, but for a long time struggled with, is if there's going to be a romantic arc to this game, can I have a same-sex romantic arc? Or are all relationships heterosexual? For a long time, it's just like, no, everyone is basically pale-skinned and heterosexual. And, I think we've kind of gotten past that, mostly, at least. But, I mean, another easy one is, can you steal something in this game? If I say, no, you can't, first of all, it's a whole lot simpler for me as a designer, but also I'm making moral choices for you, which to me is also a moral choice. If I say, yes, you can, I am opening the floodgates to a lot of things that I may not want to see, or I may recognize, let me put that differently, that I understand as a designer are going to ultimately pathological for the people involved in the game.
Wow. Yeah, because I mean, it would be not all that dissimilar from when there's a shooting in a school, and then we go to what are the games that they were playing that may have incited them to have that behavior.
Yeah, although there is, after many studies, no connection, no significant correlation between virtual violence and real world violence, which I'm happy to see. I'm also personally and entirely anecdotally, which is not science, I still wonder about that. I play shooters sometimes, and there's some shooters I don't play because they're just not the kind of thing that I want to be doing. I don't want to have those actions in my head. But again, going back to this virtual physical divide, it really does seem like we don't confuse those two. We don't say, well, I shot all these people in this game, so it's okay if I shoot them in real life. We really do, absent some major mental illness where someone would be making unfortunate decisions anyway. The games are not going to drive them to that. But there are let me go back to the thing.
How about Marilyn Manson then?
I have a lot of respect for Marilyn Manson. I never got into any Marilyn Manson music.
Do you know that story? Marilyn Manson was accused of having incited these high school shootings and stuff.
Yeah, and people with trench coats and
I got it.
When I saw a picture of Marilyn Manson just on the street as just a normal guy, I'm like, oh, I understand what he's doing. This goes back to Alice Cooper. It goes back to,
of course,
Italian street opera, right? But it's like, okay, great. I get what he's doing. I get what Lady Gaga's doing. Immense respect. Maybe not my may seem, but hey, that's fine. I got respect for him. I was going to say, in terms of the pathology, one of the things we see is that in virtual worlds in particular, if I can steal from you, if the world sets that up, some people take that as license. So, you made the rules that I can steal from somebody else, so therefore it's totally okay if I do. And again, there's a sort of moral separation between the physical and the social or the virtual. And what we find there is that the social world definitely carries across. And this is easy to see. If you've ever played a game, you're a kid and you play a game of Monopoly with your siblings, and someone nails you on Park Place or something like that, and you're like, I'll get you back. And the next game, you go, aha, now's my chance to get you. That's called metagaming. And we see this all the time. So people blur the lines between what happens in one game versus another game. And that's something that you can play with. Board games like Coup, for example, where this is a game about lying, and it's a game about how well you can lie. And if you can play that with friends who all get that and understand it and don't walk away from the table going, you know what, he's kind of a liar, then you're okay. But you have to be careful about that.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of the aspects of human psychology and sociology that we're playing with.
Feels like you really need to embody the different flavors of personalities that you put into a certain, like, wow, what does that do to you if you're even embodying something that you, like a serial killer?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a designer, first you do have to think about how are people going to misuse this, and there's a thing, for example, a well-known acronym in virtual world design called TTP, which stands for time to penis, which is if I give people the ability to design their own objects, I can measure in seconds how long it is before someone designs, creates, and inflicts on someone else a giant penis. It's not a large number, and this is constant. Yeah. So you do have to think about how is someone going to misuse this in game terms. There's also this aspect of I wouldn't want to write for a TV show where I had to write for a serial killer, because it does kind of get inside you, and I think that's part of the creative process. So there is some people. And this is just me. I'm saying there are other people saying, no, I've got no problem with that at all. I don't need to take that home with me. That's just what I'm doing at work, and that's great. I don't happen to be that way, but some people certainly are fine with it.
We've got Josina Den Berker, who actually married Ronnie and myself. She's basically had 3,000 some odd marriages in Amsterdam, and she does an art market. And she is now writing to us. I was many years on Second Life, started the CARP, which is Cybernetic Art Research Projects, and developed new virtual art with several artists from all over the world. Many people have no idea the impact it already has on our today. So this is a great example of what you mentioned earlier. Like they have a common identity, which is cybernetic art. And by that, they've actually somehow identified and therefore created together.
Exactly. And I think that the whole journey that's inherent in that is really fascinating. Someone said, oh, I want to get on Second Life. This sounds interesting. Oh, look at the things I can make. Oh, I never knew I was interested in art, and I never knew I was interested in cybernetic art, but that becomes this progressive journey of finding who you are and finding your people. This is something I told my kids when they would go off to college is you have to find your people. And if that's, D&Ders or cybernetic artists or whatever it is, find those people you go, oh, now I'm home. And there's that definite feeling of being home. And the other thing about this is that virtual worlds, especially Second Life, but many virtual worlds have really given people the ability to express themselves and to thus help other people find them too, in ways that you couldn't do in the physical world. And that could be anything. Certainly cybernetic art sounds fascinating. But there are many, many different things you could do. Say, I'm going to build an enormous medieval castle. Other people who like enormous medieval castles are going to find this and go, oh, that's great. Here, I want to make this new turret. Okay, good. And now you have this interplay between people where we all become something greater than we were on our own, which I think is just that to me is one of the aspects. One of the aspects of self-actualization, I think, actually has gotten a little bit short shrift in people's discussions of Maslow, and which is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in it for virtual worlds.
By the way, I don't know if you know Carl, because we often have people that know certain people that come on.
I do know Carl.
And I don't know what he said, but especially if you're playing diplomacy. So I think that's an inside joke.
I don't know. I've not played diplomacy with Carl. I would be afraid to. Carl's a wonderful guy, but I suspect underneath it, there are daggers waiting to come out to if I betrayed him in Italy, it would be a bad thing. Diplomacy, for anyone who doesn't know, is a game where you are the countries pre-World War I or during World War I, I guess. So I'm not sure what his remark referred to exactly, but playing. Probably going back to lying is my guess, because actually one of my first dates with my wife was in high school.
I was going to say, don't preface anything with lying, and then one of the first dates with my wife.
No. What happened was I took her to a diplomacy game, and she'd never seen it before. She'd never played it before, and it was 7 players, 6 guys, and her. And the first turn of this game, she basically, because you negotiate with the people, say, okay, I'll help you here, you help me there, that's great. And the first of the game, she lived up to all of her things she said she would do, and of course got stabbed in the back a little bit. And she said, oh, I see how this game was played. And she was this sweet young thing, and these guys did not expect her at all to be able to come back from that, but she really did. And that was part of part of the beginning of a long and wonderful relationship for us.
Wow. You could see that she had some deep insight into humanity if she could use people's predispositions against them. That's nice.
She could stand up for herself. Sure. Yeah. She just, curl up. No, that was not a trial I set up. It was just, hey, let's go do something fun. So.
That's nice. I have a question, but do we want to leave a bit of air?
That means take a deep breath in.
We have a lot of air time here. Just to check in with ourselves and see if this is the path that's sort of serving all of us. What has been, when you're moving in this direction, obviously there are awarenesses you're beginning to have. And I would be wondering, what is certain consciousness within you that arose that said wow, this is deep. What would that have been for you as you've done this?
I've touched on a few of these already. I mean, things like understanding community and understanding how communities form. One of the great things of being a game designer is it gives you license to research almost anything. So, I mean, really deeply researched. So I went on, read a lot of books and actually went on a couple of road trips looking at how towns form. And this continues to be one of my deep abiding interests. How do towns form? How do towns go away? It turns out my great-great-grandfather settled a town in Oklahoma that is almost entirely gone now. It's barely hanging on. And I've been through it. It's a semi-ghost town. But in its time, it was a thriving early American Main Street town.
But basically, you're telling me that this is how game design would actually pretty much work, because there's all these games nowadays which are forming a town, forming a country, forming an army. So in some weird way, like you're saying that we're basing this off of real life development.
To some degree. I think a lot of game designers base it off of previous games they've seen because, I can use that trope for making an army. But yeah, I mean, one of the things, again, I love about being a game designer is it's this incredibly eclectic group, eclectic community. Many years ago, I worked at Electronic Arts, worked at Maxis, and got to work with Will Wright. And the first day I walked into his office, and it was like this mad scientist toy store. There was all this stuff. There's a blimp on the ceiling and all different kinds of stuff. And they said, oh yeah, the blimp, we were researching a game about blimps. So we never got to make it, but I kept the blimp. And I'm in my home office now, not my office at school, but I have a lot of my toys from the,
I know.
from the past.
I loved your office. I felt like it was like I was right at home, like an adult playground. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, you do get to do a lot of research on a lot of different things. So go back to your question a moment ago, questions about community, questions about systems, questions about consciousness. How are these things all related? What parts of someone's attention am I playing with? Am I doing so in a responsible way as a game designer? And what part of their understanding of society am I playing with if I'm making a virtual world?
Because I'm kind of curious on the consciousness side. I've got two kind of interesting areas, but is there times when you're going into this world that you're sort of looking back at the world that we are in now, apparently, and saying, wow, like I can almost see how I'm gamified? Like how
I'm not sure if this is where you meant to take this, but one of the things that has occurred to me over and over again, to the point that I want to make a game about this, but don't know if I ever will. I think a lot of us have this inherent feeling, and maybe it's because of living through the last 50, 60 years of the sort of stable period in U.S. history, but this feeling that history is inevitable, that society is inevitable, that the way things are is the way they necessarily had to be. And I think I don't really believe that's the case at all. And there are certain points in time that I can look at. There's a thing called the Antikythera device. It was made in about 500 BC and found as part of a shipwreck, and they had to take it out of the coral and all that. It's this amazing geared device. It turns out to be a planetary observatory. But it was made with gearing techniques that weren't seen in the West again for 2,000 years.
Wow.
So about 1,500, when you look at some of the European clocks. What if that hadn't happened? What if this gearing device, if they said, hey, you know what? We can water our fields more effectively by applying the same gearing, or we can know when to water our fields more effectively. And there's interesting social reasons why that didn't happen. But you could have had a really interesting technological revolution take off 500 BC or 400 BC, which would change history completely. Wow. So when I look at game designs, and when I look at building worlds, either just in a single game world or a virtual world, I'm looking at all the possibilities. One of the things I teach my students with game design in general is you're not making an experience. You're not making the experience. You're making an experience where the player can have many, many experiences as they traverse this space that you're creating. So as a writer, I'm creating a single through line, a single novel, a single story. As a game designer, I'm creating sort of a palette, a world in which people can experience stories. And I look back at the world and see that same thing. Like, okay, we've had this one through line in our history. What are all the others? And what could we learn if we could play with those?
Yeah, it's sort of like those movies where they said if they didn't get on that subway, the whole world would have been a whole different place. Exactly
right. Yeah.
I can never play games. Like, I remember probably the last games I played was when I was 16, 17 years old. But I remember it always used to enter me and in my dreams, and I would be living in the game, like mentally how to navigate it the whole day. It felt like it was taking over me.
Yeah. And there are definitely people who feel that way. The only time I think I've experienced that was once I was sick and really couldn't do anything except watch TV and play Tetris. I played a lot of Tetris.
Wow.
To the point that when I took a nap, the Tetris pieces were still falling. But there's a concept of psychological distance where some people really like being in the game with zero psychological distance. A first-person shooter or anything where I'm running around at like World of Warcraft, it's first person, I'm running around this world. Other people like to have a little more distance and like to stand off a little bit. Sometimes the games that do this are called God games or a lot of simulation games. If I'm playing, SimCity or something like that, I am hovering above the world. Sorry, I'm using my hands a lot here, but I'm hovering above the world somewhere, looking down on it, and it's not really me. It's a thing that I'm manipulating. Back in the early 2000s, we did a little bit of work on this, and it does seem like there's a gender split there, not a strong one, but interestingly, and maybe just culturally, probably just culturally, a lot of male gamers want to have less psychological distance, and more female gamers are more want to have more psychological distance. I'd love to redo that work now and see if that's changed at all. But I think it's also personality. Some people just don't want to embody the game because, like you say, the melding is too complete and it's not comfortable. And everyone has their comfort level. That said, what I would also highly recommend that you try out some of the new tabletop games that are coming. We're really in a renaissance now, have been for several years, of tabletop games. And there are just some amazing games being made there that some of which can get under your skin, and some of which are just a wonderful time with your family.
I'm good. I'll probably get addicted. So I already know it, so I'll just stay away.
Oh, well.
Now, if we step out of the game and we see life where we are at right now, right? We had the COVID, or we are still in the COVID period. Like, did you see that coming?
Oh, no. I mean, yes and no. No one saw COVID coming. At the same time, people in and out of governments around the world knew something was going to happen. My personal feeling has been for many years that on a number of fronts we were pushing our luck. By the way, pushing your luck is another game mechanic. It's like you take one more try, maybe it's one more time, maybe it'll still keep going for me. And I feel like as a society we've been doing that in numerous ways, in terms of certainly in terms of how we deal with the planet, the ecology, the climate, how we deal with our income disparity as a country, racial disparity, age disparity. There's a number of these things, all of which are teeing up crises waiting to happen. And I feel like now we are experiencing multiple ones of those at the same time. I also have to say, and not to be too pessimistic here, I don't think we've seen by any stretch the end of these, nor do I think this is the big one. To put it in terms of like an earthquake, like they say, oh well, the big one's coming to San Andreas in California, and then it'll be fine because for another couple hundred years we don't have to worry about it. This is not that. This is something in that direction. But in terms of a specific pandemic, no. I mean, I think you could look at this and say, look at all the conditions around the world and say something like this is going to happen. And it could come from many places. And once something like that happens, then you see things like all of the divides that we've had in our society that have exacerbated over time are kind of laid bare by this. So it's like, it's when times are good, you can keep up the fiction of a bad relationship really easily.
Yeah.
So when times get hard, all of a sudden all that comes to a halt. And that's kind of where we are.
When you talk like this, and this is something I haven't spoken about on the show all that much, and nor with you, is that when I began my own sort of spiritual awakening thing, I went, funnily enough, to read a lot of books on systems thinking. Like it seems maybe counterintuitive on some level, but it was that the world isn't causal. There are so many things. You talked earlier about the tornado.
Right.
It's like, if you can allow yourself to see the tornado, or I would almost say witness it, because you don't even necessarily, it's almost like you can't attach like clarity anymore. You attach wonder to it. You're like, if this has a positive or negative on this, which has a positive negative on this, then basically you're looking at a systems diagram in your head.
Exactly.
And you're still imposing a reality, but the reality is a little bit more nuanced than a causal reality.
Right. That is, yeah. And this is something actually that I teach my students. I actually teach a class for brand new freshmen at Indiana University called Games as Systems as Life. And the idea behind this course is to help them. They design games, and that's a lot of fun, and they get some stuff out of it. But it's also to help them understand that they are part of many systems, and they can be affected by and affect systems. And some of them are like a tornado, and you can look at it and you go, "Yep, that's a system, and it's going to affect me really badly in 5 minutes here, or it's going over that way, or whatever." But I think that understanding of the world as systems is vital. The way I've put it elsewhere is that kind of like the literacy for our century. In the 20th century, you could get by if you weren't literate until, mid-century or so, and then you were really being left behind by society. I think in the same way now, you can get by without understanding the world as systems for a little while, but very quickly you're going to be left behind because that kind of understanding is just vital.
It reminds me of, more recently, because of the pandemic, the movies that were about pandemics are getting big. And I don't know if you saw that one that I think it might have been called Pandemic.
But there's one called Contagion.
Contagion.
Yeah.
I liked Outbreak much better, but Contagion. The reason why Contagion was so beautiful was because at the end it was a systems diagram. I mean, basically, it was just for deforestation. Bats can no longer be in their own habitat, so they have to occupy where people are living. Then the poop, and then the interaction with the pigs, and then eating the pigs. So basically, that is in a weird way a game. I mean, you look at it in that way.
It is, and we use the same structures in games. And I actually went back and watched Contagion, kind of to see if I wasn't sure if I was going to make it through the movie. In the past, I've loved that movie for the systems nature of it and for the science of it. And what I was struck by in watching it this time was it did a very good job. It was almost prescient in terms of how their virus starts.
Yeah,
but things happen much too fast. And maybe because it was a much more quick acting virus and much more lethal than what we're facing now, fortunately.
Yeah.
But for a movie, it felt like, okay, they just compressed all this stuff for a movie because they had day 28, day 33. Yeah. I'm like, no, things did not happen that fast at all. But that aspect of seeing exactly what you said, seeing those systems is, I think, just crucial, and it's something that I try and get across in my work. There's something in game design, sort of the opposing view, if you will, that some people refer to as the content furnace, where if I design a game where you're going to play through a narrative that I create, and there's nothing wrong with making narrative games, but a lot of game designers put themselves in this position where they are now having to feed the furnace of content to keep you playing the game. As opposed to, I'm going to create a bunch of systems, set those systems up, and then you can interact with them how you like.
Yeah.
Going back to what I was saying about history we feel like history is inevitable. I think that's the content furnace. We want things to have a nice through line, to have a nice ending, to have sort of wrap up with a bow, and that's just not how the world works.
No,
it's much more about these competing and interacting systems. And I will say, at every level, from the subatomic up to the galactic, and again, meaning no exaggeration at all, at every single one of those levels, there are systems that are in place that are directing how things happen, why galaxies are the shape they are, why water is wet, why hydrogen is the way it is.
Nice.
I have to think of the one game I've had to watch my wife play when she wants to decompress, and that's Plants vs. Zombies. I think they've mastered the art of addiction.
Film her doing that.
Like that's the art of addiction. They figured out a way to give you an experience that gives you just enough tension to succeed with, and enough like value and enough additional complexity. So you always feel like you're continuing with, but you're always with a familiar kind of experience.
And there are so many amazing things going on there in terms of that game design. First, that game is actually there's a genre of games called tower defense games that actually came out of a strategy game to start with. But Plants vs. Zombies is sort of this distillation of a certain type of tower defense game. And what you said is exactly right. They give you a set of concepts Don't let them, they're going to start here. Don't let them get to here. And they add complexity to that, and they invert some things. And what is happening in your mind, and one of the reasons why that's so engaging is, and I would say engaging, not addicting, is that you are slowly building up the complexity of your own mental model, like building a castle out of just a few lumps of stone. And that's really enjoyable. We love, as humans, we love building mental models that hang together. And what's happening as you interact with that game is the game says, here's a new thing, and it gives you a new capability, or it's a new twist. And you say, okay, great. If that follows the rules I already know and extends them in some ways or twists them in some ways, I can use that back at the game. And the game says, that's right. Good job. You beat the zombies. And you say, yay, terrific, I win, or I get a mental reward, and then it does it again and again and again. And building up that complexity is something we really love. There is, and we take too long now, but the difference between engagement and addiction is the difference between liking and wanting. And this is something that I read in actual addiction literature. People who are addicted to drugs very often don't like the drug, but they want the drug. And we have two different circuits in our brain for liking something. This is fun. This is enjoyable. This is engaging versus I need this right now. And that, unfortunately, games can and often do tap into both circuits. I would say Plants vs. Zombies mostly stays on the liking side, not the wanting side.
Yeah,
mostly.
I exaggerate just because it makes for better
better TV show.
Yeah. That's an important part. Yeah.
Have you ever created a game with an intent to actually and I'm doing this to get people more connected to themselves?
I have worked on a few mindfulness games. They are very, very difficult to work on. Very difficult to accomplish the goal. Let me put it that way. And I think, honestly, that's mostly because we're bad at mindfulness. I think we
want to play mindfulness. Come on.
Yes.
I think we just don't yet know enough about how we do it ourselves, and even teaching it to somebody else in person is difficult. And setting up something where here's a set of systems that you can explore as you like, and you will approach some kind of mindfulness is extremely difficult. I will give you one example that was semi-intentional from The Sims. We got a player who was submitting sort of a bug report one day, and what she said was, all my sim wants to do is sit at the computer and play games, and I really wanted to get her to get up and walk around outside. And then I realized maybe I should get up and walk around outside. And that was, I thought, a really fascinating breakthrough. One other little thing about The Sims that and to show you how hard this kind of thing is to bring off, Will Wright told me this, that the game's original intent, well, it had a couple of original intents, but one of them certainly was an anti-consumerist message. In that you can earn a lot of money in the game, but you only have so much time. Time is the one resource none of us can expand. And in that game, as you get more money and buy more stuff, everything you buy has a chance to break down. As you buy more stuff, eventually something is breaking down, and eventually you end up being owned by your things rather than owning them, because you're servicing them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful, subtle, and unfortunately I think a little bit too subtle for the way it was brought across. But it's a subtle point that I think helps, at least in terms of helping people see how are you living your life? How are you playing your game?
Yeah, I always like to sing "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose."
Well, actually, that gets back in a way to one of the points I said earlier about virtual worlds. When you say, here is a blank slate world, I'm playing on a Minecraft server now with my kids and grandkids. That's the age we live in. And it's this wonderful blank slate world that has monsters in it, but you can build houses and make mines and things like that. And there's something really freeing about that. I don't have a mortgage in that world. I don't have to worry about COVID-19 in that world. It's just a place where I don't have anything, and that's fine.
We are coming up to the end of our hour.
Andy, we're at the end of our hour.
I've got a lot more questions, but we'll park that for when I see you next time.
All right. Sounds great.
Thank you for being on. It was really fun.
Thank you very much. A lot of fun for me, certainly.
There's a lot of my brain like kind of went in so many different directions during this talk. I'm like, wow, I've got 20 more questions that I can't ask in this time frame.
Well, thank you for letting me be a little bit nonlinear here. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's what I'm hearing more and more, and this is something that I'm always been intrigued by. We had someone on talking about operating systems of the mind, and they're developing their own game called Grace OS. And it was kind of like, how do we look at the program we're running and the sub-programs and sort of influence those in ways that we can live more fulfilling lives and so on. Yeah,
I think that's a big area for the next decade or so, certainly.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Look forward to seeing you next time. Yeah.
Likewise.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Wow.
The hours
just drop. They like disappear. Yeah. Announcements.
Where are we, Andy? We're on.
I think this is an important announcement.
Yeah, tomorrow, guys, it's Andy and Ronnie's birthday together. 93.
93. I am 50 tomorrow.
And just for the fun, they're gonna be the wonderful kills tomorrow will be between him and Ronnie. And just for the fun, they are inviting people within the network to claim 3 minutes, and 3 minutes you can entertain, sing, share silence, tease them, like 3 minutes to gift them with something, like whatever comes for you, and have some fun together.
Yeah, and given that there's so few people that have decided to do this, you might get 5 minutes.
I'm probably going to come on every 3 minutes.
So you're invited. I've given it an hour plus, so I kind of left the 2 hours, but we'll see who shows up. It's just, and the beauty is, it's the 50th show on my 50th birthday. Like, how cool is that? And it gets me off the hook.
Did you plan for that?
I added one show to make sure that would work out.
Great.
And then the next day, June 12th at 5 p.m., we'll see at 5 or 6. I still have to negotiate the exact time. Craig Goosen, who is part of a dynasty of boxing family, they have Goosen Tudor Promotions. They've basically promoted fights for Tyson and for Nunn, all of the people that are basically in the boxing world. And it'll be a great opportunity just to have some fun and to hear this life. His dad was supposed to be in the Boxing Hall of Fame this weekend. He died a few years ago. So we're going to get in and kind of just hear what that life was like. And so that was it for us today, no?
Thank you, Magdalena.
It was great to be with you today. And we'll see you next time on A Wonderful Chaos. Okay, we'll get it.
Go.
We're still on the